And we're live on YouTube. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in the NPM RFC's repo, issue 614. And it's a small agenda today. Just a quick reminder for folks, this call and all comms on the RFC's repos are covered on the code of conduct. We ask you to please be kind as you're speaking, and if others are, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'll just copy and paste the meeting notes here for folks. Feel free to add yourselves to the agenda or to the attendees list, sorry, in the HackMD doc there that I just shared. Does anybody, before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they want to share? Go ahead, Gar.
I just want to shout out to John for landing that feature. Thank you. He submitted 3 pull requests that implemented something that was very nice, treating cert as off in a nerf-darted way without breaking anyone who has been existing. Made some very fine decisions along the way, and it was a pleasure reviewing those PRs. So just thank you.
Well, thank you, Gar. I appreciate the reviews. Yeah, it's a great process overall. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. Quickly, just a note on your RFC. I put it into a section that just said to ratify, essentially. I know we spoke about that last week. I don't think there's any necessarily anything crazy we would want to change about the RFC itself, so it just needs to be pulled into the actual repo and accepted and then moved into implemented. So quickly moving into the agenda, unless folks, were there any other announcements from folks? If not, the first item was the proposed backwards compatible improvements to compression. Evan said he wasn't going to be able to make today's call again, unfortunately. So unless other folks had any talking points to that, I think we can just skip over that for today. If not, we can move on to 593. So only registry tarballs. Owen, did you want to give a quick update if you've been able to take a look at NPM query or done any work on this RFC at all?
Sure, thanks. In fact, I was able to play around with it a little bit. So I was able to do the NPM linking from Roy's feature branch locally on my machine, and then I created a GitHub repo just with like a Babel from the registry and ESLint from the GitHub, and was able to run a quick test using some of the examples that you had that were in the query doc. So I could paste it in here. I just wanted to make sure I was like getting it. So I did something like that, and it popped only one result, which was ESLint. So, you know, mechanics are working. And so I guess the next step really at this point is to figure out how to best craft the query. And then basically, I think, you know, because that was the recommendation, just figure out a query that we can basically just map the more like flag friendly name to. So yeah, the only, I guess, follow-up question that I have is there a way to query like the negative, like as, you know, Git or Bitbucket or anything like that? So basically, like, is there a way to query like implicitly, I suppose, versus like testing the negative of everything we don't want?
Yeah, I see Gar's hands up, and I'll let him speak to probably your question, probably answer your question as well. Yeah.
Yes, I've been actually playing with query myself. The not operator is, I think, what you need. And yeah, because I've been trying to query Sorry, I just drew a blank because I have two things in my head. Yeah, right now I'm trying to do queries for things that require a package that them themselves don't have a certain dev dependency. And so, yeah, the not operator, I can show you my query, which won't work in the branch right now because there was a bugging query I found. But that query right there will show you anything that requires not, that doesn't have this dependency and dev dependencies, right? So you can, it's totally the not operator is what you want.
Okay. So is there I guess, a selector for like a semver range? Because basically if the flag is tell me everything not that, I don't, Git, Bitbucket, whatever, local file,
Yeah, you could do you could just do a non, it doesn't, I think not semver, I'd have to go look, but semver is thing. So I believe you should be able to do anything that, like, anything in it that has a dependency that's not semver. I think you should be able to query. I'd have to dig into that, but that should be possible.
Cool.
So the reason my hand is raised is related to this and the next one. I just want to throw the idea out there. We need a flag on npm query that says if you have results, exit uncleanly. If you don't have results, exit uncleanly. And with those two flags, things like this could easily be a linting rule or a pre or post rule. This and the next one we're going to discuss. So that's my hand raised.
Cool. Yes, I guess just familiarizing myself, excuse me, more with like the vocabulary, I guess, or like the keywords. But yeah, so basically it sounds like if I just dive a little bit more into the selector syntax, I should be able to find like not semver or something like that through what's available.
I think so. I'm about to wrap up a little project I'm on now, and I'll look at this and see in the notes here if I can come up with a better query.
Sure. Yeah, because I think certainly as like the first, like, I guess a layer of defense, because I know that, I'm not sure if Jordan's on the call, but I know he had expressed a potential exception if it's like a local file. So, I don't know how like literal or, I'm not sure if you could like do this, and then if someone's like, accept local or we allow local, you can kind of chain on top of the base one. So
yeah, what I think you're looking for is type, Owen, and specifically the type pseudo selector. It pulls the information from npm package arc. So you don't have to do what you're doing with the resolved at all. Even you can do a type selector. So the type then will give you the options to use the same categories we use internally, which is get, tag, version, range, file, directory, remote, and alias. And so you can use that to essentially figure out what type of dep it is, whether it's a git dep or not. So you don't have to use the resolved. Like resolved is like the attribute selector you're using. It's definitely, it's a catch-all for like any metadata we may not know about, but there are some privileged pseudo selectors like type that that we do know, and we do a little bit. When you kept saying semver, I was trying to figure out what you meant by semver, because there's a semver selector as well that allows you to do semver ranges, which is really nice. Which again, these are nuanced, selectors that are only specific to like, obviously our implementation. They aren't spec'd in the CSS spec anywhere or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, because I think that level of hinting is what I'm looking for. Basically, I want to have that, or I think the most predictable way would be, having like that. So it sounds like there's something that's, so I'm not sure if there's I guess if is there somewhere to look for kind of the under the hood details? Because it sounds like that's going to be the, okay, cool.
So the RFC has a bunch of that, and I think our yeah, there's a bunch of docs or a doc that is going to come out with npm query. Even if you look in your locally checked out branch, you'll see that there's docs. If you run, was it npm help docs query, it'll pull up
This is
the
helpful. Oh, yeah, this type I think is exactly what I think would get this the cleanest, I think. So yeah, type tag or something. Okay, no, this is good. Yeah, I think this is what I was looking for.
Cool. And you can change them together, right? So you could say this comma or this comma type. And actually what's really nice is with the CSS selector for pseudo is, I believe it is, I think it's is, you can do combinators. So it could be like this type, this type, this type in commas within a nice thing. You don't have to do the entire selector. You can just do at that specific like scope. You can say just all these different types. It could be any one of these different types. So you don't have to expand out, which is what gets CSS, I think, a little bit verbose in normal when you're writing it normally, is you would have to usually have expanded them with selectors. The selector v4 spec, I think they introduced, I think is, and it is helps you include like multiple sets like that. So
yeah, it looks like basically I just want tag version range, maybe, I guess. Maybe alias. I know, like I said, Jordan mentioned like a local file, because I guess that assumes like intent or something like that. But I guess let me
You almost want a not list instead of a list. You want to make sure it's not a git or alias.
I think you mean file. Yeah, so in npm package arg, like we consider a local file to be like file. So that's the type that will come back. So you could do, like Gar was saying, you can say not file and not, or sorry, not type file and not type, let's say git, right? Or for whatever reason, like if you want. But that's why we're saying, like with this now available to you, it kind of changes how you look at like the
it's like specificity, because someone could provide their own types and those could override like the default ones, right? If someone wanted to say, well, I want the default you have, but allow a remote, not git, but a remote, so someone could take,
sure. Yeah,
I guess the question, the question more regarding file and directory though was if those should be treated with the same permissiveness as a tag. Jordan raised that point of like, well, if it's a local file or I see a directory here, like that's me saying, this is on my system, making it like an exception versus like only a semper tag or range, like literally stopping the, closing the door past that, So I was just curious what others thought about if a local looks like file or directory would be permissible within the scope of this particular feature to include it as opposed to exclude it.
Yeah, go ahead, Gar.
I think that question is exactly why we do not want to codify this into a separate command, but maybe document how to use npm query to solve this problem. Because this and the next one we're going to talk about, I really don't think need to be baked into npm. They can just be, here's the query you want to use to solve this problem. And if we add those flags to npm query, it's a single lint you put in your dependencies script, which we just added, and then you're done. And then it's self-serve. You can make those choices yourself with good docs that we have, right? Hey, if you want to do this, right? So where we don't have to, we don't want to bake in those decisions because not everyone's going to want the same thing. That makes sense?
So, yeah, I think it does make sense, except in this particular case, I think like the whole idea, and I think the reason this work sprung up is because we are considering not supporting or installing git deps by default, right? Like in the long term, we're talking about the long term. And so like at first auditing, having warnings essentially, I think would be helpful that you have these types of dependencies that we are known to be problematic potentially, right? And if you want to ignore that warning, that's fine. Or if you want to ignore that audit, like that's fine. But I think that's how this particular like work and Owen's work in this has sprung up, is because I think we all know that like remote dApps are dangerous. And so like, I think to speak to what your question is, Owen, specifically as well, like file and directory types of packages and dependencies, I think are okay. Like, I think that's what Jordan was trying to speak to, that like, I think those are totally fine. It's the ones that we outlined here that are the problematic are the remote and the get dependencies, right? So those two are the ones that we're concerned about. There should be the ones that people are concerned about when they see those in your tree. You should, they likely have then just increased the scope of the number of hosts that you're relying on for your packages, right? So you've gone from, I'm configured to this one registry, but then a package here told me to go fetch, something from GitHub or from a different Git repository, or it told you to go get something from somebody's personal domain. You don't know. Like, we need to do a better job at like surfacing that. And I think that that's right. So I would say the grouping should be get and remote are the two types that we should be looking for and warning on when we see those. Everything else should be, I think, fine, because it either deals with something that's local, so a file or directory, or it's dealing with something that's specific to the registry implementation. So tags, versions, ranges, and then aliases will only map it to the specifically configured registry. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because if Jordan was here, I know he'd say to Gar's point, which I'm not disputing per se, but I know Jordan said that like, he was worried that query could be used as a way to push more things into user land. But I think, just to echo Darcy's point, was that my understanding was that the prevailing need for something like this far outweighs the potential, I guess, maintenance cost of, making it an opinion of the NPM CLI, just because of the nature of, the surface vector of dependency. So I get it, because I think I could also see from Gar's point, like, you add a third one, is someone going to remember to either add it or remove it from the list in like NPM 10 or 11, and now you kind of forgot that, oh, whoops, we forgot to update this, and now everybody's been exploited by Dropbox URLs or something like that, you know what I mean? So anyway, just, I can see both sides, but I think my opinion, for whatever it's worth, I see more value than less in, at the very least, the warnings and being able to fail on them at the very least, So anyway.
Gar.
Yeah, I agree. That's just a point I want to bring up, and I'll continue to push. And it's not that I'm hardline. I just want to be mindful of it. Sounds like this is fine. And I think the forgetting to change problem is a wash either way. Either we forget or they forget. Someone could potentially forget. So I don't think it matters for that argument. So, it's fine to do. And I would say it's just non-Git steps at this point.
Right.
Throw on a Git step is the big thing.
Yeah. Cool. I had one other thought, but it escaped me. So, okay, I guess that's it.
Cool. I know, at least, I'm not sure, Gar, did you add in a flag to query for that whole? Okay.
I figured that and hoisted can be something that lands after we show query.
So there was a discussion, I think Gar and I had offline about adding essentially a like error if empty, or error if like some sort of flag that was named something along those lines, to essentially change the status code of npm query if there's no result, like empty, like error if no result, essentially, which would really make npm query turn into like that, like a really good audit tool, right? So if instead of never failing, instead of never erroring, which is what the default mode is for npm query, if you provide this flag, then it would essentially error if it found no results. Then that could be flipped to also be like error if you found results, right? So we could have two potential flags that you could configure or pass to npm query to then be used essentially as this like auditing tool, and could be the underpinning for a lot of folks audits. So that was something we discussed internally, and as Gar just said, like can fast follow once we release this initial version. But just want to speak to that so that that might also be an something easy to do at the command line. It won't help necessarily with the programmatic usage. You have to fail yourself, like just check the length of the array and fail. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything I'm missing on that, Gar.
Nope, other than that, basically that is the solution to the next RFC we're talking about.
Cool. Any other questions you had though, Owen, or do you feel like I think what you were looking for is the not type get. So
yeah, I guess I'm not sure if it's too early, but would you? Yeah, so you would prefer the asserting in the negative as opposed to asserting in the affirmative. So not get remote versus is version XYZ.
Oh, you're talking about the name of the actual command?
No, like, do I assert not these two or only these four?
I guess it'd be like what we don't ever show you. I guess we do at the end of an audit. We show you all these packages are clean, but usually during an audit we show you like, are there advisories, right? So it's like you are showing the issues. So like you probably want to find all the get and all the remote packages, and when you find them, that's the problem. Those are the ones that you surface, right? So you don't want the negative, I don't think, because then you're just querying for all the good things. Really, you want to be looking for all the things that we think are problematic, right? Like, so
yeah, I guess I wasn't sure. The opposite would be that they would all be explicitly listed. So if you looked at it in like the source, be like, okay, it's these 5, but yeah, I makes sense. Go either way. But yeah. Oh, and then the other thought that I recalled was actually more about query was, I guess, how to, maybe this is a good case study for it, is how to thread that needle and like measure the impact of when it should be in user land. Like, no, you have the tools, instrument your own query, like, BYO flag or something like that, right? As opposed to, because part of it is like, it does shield you from the maintenance of having to implement every flag yourself, because now anybody could have made this, not get like audit for themselves, but NPM's chosen to specifically add it, even though they could have just kept it a flag. And I remember from the query conversation, like having that governance, so it was, as predictable as possible, like, well, why this one and not this one, So anyway, just more food for thought, but that's it.
Gar, I saw you on mute. Did you want to speak? Oh, you're still muted.
Just to point out that these won't be flagged. This is going to be a separate command for things that use query under the hood. This isn't going to be part of NPM query itself, these baked in ones we use. These are going to be a new set of commands for doing these kinds of linting. And that, I think, will help us mentally make this distinction between, is this a specific command we want to bake in the opinions for, or should this just be something we suggest people use NPM query for? Yeah,
Right.
NPM audit. Yeah, it'll be part of NPM audit, or maybe it's not. Maybe audit becomes a subcommand of this new thing because it's a broader concept, but it's not going to be part of NPM query, the command itself. So that'll help us with that mental divide, which I agree is something we just need to discuss every time. I don't know that we should come up with a rule. It should be hard fought every time.
Right. I think that's that last point is the key one, right? Like, I think that we are over time, like, just going to have that conversation again and again, like what makes sense to essentially privilege or like bring into in a more sophisticated way, in an easier way to essentially alias or to change our defaults. That's going to be a conversation every single time. Like, we know looking forward that there are some changes we want to make, and this just happens to be one that aligns with like where we're going, but there might be some query that the community starts to find really helpful, like licensing checks, right? Like, or something like that, which like has been our radar, but not really. And now that could be potential conversational. It's just a simple query. Can we get it privileged into the default checks that are happening in NPM? You know, and then we have that conversation and we decide whatever that is. I think it's really tough to like try to set any kind of thresholds or like any kind of framework. I think it's just a discussion each and every time. Like, if we have the feeling that there's like enough, enough of a push, enough of a drive, and there's enough value there, then we'll probably add it. Yeah,
I suppose that's what the RFC process is for, right?
Yeah, totally, exactly. Like somebody could say, like, look at all these packages that are basically aliasing this under the hood. They're all using NPM query, and we go, oh, like, you shouldn't have to like be writing this, or look at all these packages with these scripts, these NPM scripts that are referencing NPM query to do these checks. Maybe you should privilege that specific one that we're seeing in userland so much. And that I think that's the right way to go. Like, we sort of let the community sort of start to play with things, and then they tell us, oh, you should have this and that, and the defaults should change. And in terms of the defaults changing here, like, we're seeing, like, again, the concern about having multiple hosts essentially that were not configured up front be an issue right now. Having Git deps and remote deps in your tree is a scary thing. So we want to mitigate that. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate all that.
No worries.
Insight.
Yeah. And again, as Garcia even saying here in chat, like, there could be a potential future where we can let you write a whole bunch of your own, queries that can be aliased quickly. It definitely is a tool that's going to allow us to build better tooling and a better framework around how, again, we enable the community better and support the community better in a more holistic way, right? So it's not going to be a catch-all. I don't think it's going to ideally solve a lot of the problems, but I don't know if it's going to catch every single problem. And NPM does have, like, our team does have best practices that we know of that we want to enforce, and some defaults that we want to enforce, right? So, like, we're not, in terms of production versus dev dependencies, in terms of peer dependencies, we have opinions on these things, and that's what makes that's what makes us different than other package managers, right? So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Any other questions on that or comments? Okay, we can jump on to the next or sort of last item that we had here, with a good healthy amount of time now to speak to it. I know we sort of had only a few minutes last week. This is the adding singleton packages RFC number 23. I know David Ziering, who jumped on here, had originally poked us about this, and I think we had a good discussion last week. I'm not sure if there's any updates you want to share. I see you commented last week.
Yeah, I left a HackMD on the comments list, and the important part about it is the possible solution at the end, which essentially is a rough proposal of expectations. So just to kind of recap the discussion from last week, we were talking about having better control at the app host layer for defining which things we want as singletons or single installs. The general idea is when we violate those expectations, there's some way to clearly indicate to users that something they didn't expect is happening, and that here are the resolution steps that they can take. So whether it's opting into allowing the duplication, so there's a little bit of friction in doing that, they could work around it. Or we can actually provide sort of a walkthrough of how to resolve it. And a lot of times that means we downgrade something to match a dependency, or we have to upgrade something, or we have to work across repos to kind of let them know you need to support the new version of TypeScript or React or whatever it happens to be. So I listed just a general stab at what would errors look like. I think that's interesting to consider. Whenever you hit these scenarios where there's 2 copies of React or 2 copies of a thing, how do we communicate that? And how do we make it so that the developer can either opt in, or here are your options. You know, you have these 5 versions. Which one do you want to choose, or which ones do you want to allow? And then from that information, we can then translate that into steps on how to resolve that. And it's not always resolvable. Some things are and some things aren't. But that's really what we're looking at. And I don't have any updates on this is now built, but I wanted to jot down the sort of expectation and the problems that we have around the peer dependencies, because they're intending to solve this exact problem where we don't introduce dupes. It's just that they're at the wrong layer. Like we do want to not have dupes. It's really at the app host layer that we know best. And then there are cases, and they are minor, but they are edge cases where, coming back to the original RFC, it was like singleton scenarios where I have a library that has React context. One of the things that we're doing in-house right now is separating all the React context into one package that never major releases. It's always a 1.0. Everything else can major release all they want, and we can adapt to that, and we can have duplicates. We can have the React button in its own package, and you have 3 different versions of it, but they all use the same context package. So that works, and that's okay. So in that case, we would mark the context package as this is a singleton, but we would allow duplication for all the other ones. And then, of course, at the app host layer, you have full control. So you can say, actually, I know that these 2 scenarios have different singleton versions, but they're sandboxed and they're separate, and that's totally cool. That's a real scenario that we have. So everything has to be controllable at the app host. But if you have any thoughts about that, or if there is already tools out there or efforts that are similar to this, where we can kind of consolidate the thinking there, I think that that's really useful.
Go ahead, Gar, I see your hands up.
Just that this is a big chunk of change, and the only way it's going to work is if we figure out a way to do it iteratively. And I think the first step is being able to have a way at the app layer of saying, this is a rule I have, regardless of what the error messages look like or resolved. And I was playing around with npm query on a lot of stuff this week, and I think with those flags is the solution, because you can run, I've got in chat here, an npm query for anything named React that's not right there, right? And if I get results, blow up on that. I think that's a good first step. I don't think, this doesn't address how to, teaching them how to resolve, but we can get to that. And so that would be my only input, is that I want to think about this iteratively, and I think the next step is to have a concept of hoisted in NPM query, because the path globbing doesn't play very nicely with scoped modules. I can't come up with a glob that says node module / foo or at foo, right? Because as far as directories are concerned, scope modules are one directory. So having a hoisted thing would be the next step, so that you could write a query for generic. I need to know what isn't hoisted and make sure it's not this kind of a thing. So those are my only two updates. Input to that is I don't see anything actionally wrong in the RFC, just that the end, there's a big distance between here and there, and I want to know what we do next. And I really think NPM query is what we do next.
One quick question actually for you guys, based on that what you just said. Does Path now accept globs? Did we fix that, or
it always has.
Okay.
The problem is I don't know how to make a glob that matches node module / ms and node module at npm CLI ms and nothing else.
Okay. I think
It's hoisted as a special thing that means it's node module / my name, which may or may not have a slash. And because of that slash, the glob approach isn't something we can use generically to find if something is hoisted or not. So we're going to need that keyword just because of the scoped modules.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah, I have to apologize, David. I'll have to read through your whole HackMD doc. It's a very good write-up. But I do see that you have defined like essentially like a mocked up sort of dependency policies that looks similar to exactly, I think, what Gar is speaking to, right? In terms of using query maybe to do the matching. You have this like concept of matching on name, and even matching, it looks like name, and with like a glob there, that's potentially a route or a path, I guess. And then applying a policy to those. That's very interesting. This is essentially along the lines of what we've been talking about with Audit, like improvements to Audit and exactly what we're talking about just before with Owen, in terms of allowing folks to define maybe a whole bunch of tests that they want to run or a whole bunch of audits themselves. And maybe, you know, these two things collide or become the same thing, like audits and policies become the same concept, or use the same mechanism for defining a query that is going to pass and fail. They become like these almost like specialized scripts, you know, that are defined in your applications package JSON and define those policies, and they'll fail or pass. What you were speaking to about, and I apologize if you've written more about it in here, but the interactive installation, almost like the guide for making those decisions, sounded, if I remember correctly, roughly like 2.5 years ago, when we started down the path of respecting peer depths, when we were doing the work there, we did consider what it would look like when we were going to error. So the e-resolve errors that are now famous, infamous, I guess you should say, we were trying to avoid those situations as much as possible, which is why we came up with flags like legacy peer depths to kind of ignore them temporarily, those issues. But we were also considering like, okay, what would it mean for you to step into different modes, or was there different modes that we could essentially operate under to try to resolve these conflicts, these period dependency conflicts, and we essentially have 3 different modes inside of Arborist that it falls into, and whether or not you're using the force flag will opt you into a different mode of essentially trying to resolve those dependencies, but it's not on a case-by-case basis. It's not interactive either, right? It's just via flags that you would opt into one of those modes of making those decisions. And I thought what was interesting about what you were saying was just, can I get walked through? And what I've seen in the ecosystem also with like update tooling, package update tooling, is the interactive modes. And we've talked about this for a long time, how we could improve our our update, user experience to allow for interactivity. So you could choose which versions that were out of date, which ones you'd like to update in an interactive mode. It sounds like what we are also missing is like an interactive installation. Once we hit those errors, instead of just spitting out, depending on what kind of mode you're in, instead of just spitting out an error, we could potentially allow you to sort of make some decisions at that point and then maybe generate an override mapping for you, or somehow help you get to a place that you are not receiving any errors post install, essentially. And you've made all the decisions along the way, which is what I think what you were saying. And I think that should go hand in hand with probably the interactive updates as well, work that we would do. But that sounds very interesting. Like, I think that's like I'd be in favor of us trying to look into what that could be. So
that sounds good. I think on our side, well, if there's someone, if you have someone that can look at it on your side, that's awesome. We could work together on it. And I think on our side, we could always do something outside of the client and run it as a post install to like trial it. Because I wouldn't want to put anything in sort of standard package JSON schema or anything if it doesn't work. Because I think there's some edge cases in that interactive mode that are really hard to resolve. But we have so much of the metadata. We know every package's dependencies from the service layer. So we should be able to say, like, here's the viable remedy towards like, oh, you have to downgrade these 3 things and then you're good.
We do this for audit, right? So like NPM audit is able to intelligently either downgrade or upgrade you when you run fix. So like when you're in that mode, like it will try to, again, I forget, I'd have to look into this, but like there's essentially like 3 or 4 different modes that Arborist can get into when it's trying to build the ideal tree to that aren't as, I think, it's not very user facing. It's not very user friendly to know that you're being opted into one of these sort of modes or strategies, I guess, for reification with these conditions applied to them, right? So, like in Audit's case, when you apply audit fix, you might get downgraded a version in some cases to fix apply, to get a non-vulnerable version of that package. So we have, like you said, we do have all the information available to us to try to help you find a version that is going to match maybe your server range, or like you might have to make a decision about that, or you might need to be applying an override, right? So this is where I bring up overrides again, is because somehow there's a mismatch within your transitive dependencies and maybe direct dependencies that you want to resolve on behalf of like the people that you're depending upon, right? Like they have decided not to patch for whatever reason their issues, or they have decided not to upgrade or change their semper ranges to be able to pull in like the most up-to-date version of a transitive dependency. You can override that at the project layer through overrides. And so being able to have an interactive way of generating, I think the overrides file is like the key here. Like it's the key missing piece here, because otherwise you have to be very knowledgeable to hand write, I think, overrides and be very, so the interactive piece for sure. Like if you were interested in helping build something like that, some tooling, and then we would probably love to bring it back in especially if you were finding ways to not create net new fields in package.json, but to leverage the existing overrides, let's say spec, and then leverage maybe like at least with npm query, leverage that syntax to, if you had to introduce like a policies, top level policies field or top level audits field or something like that, be using those as the backbone for the syntax that was being used to do the matching, I guess, would be how I would
Is
kick
there
that off.
is there an audit section actually in the schema?
Not today.
Okay.
There's been lots of conversations about what we should do there. One of the oldest RFCs that we have open is actually about creating audit resolvers. And so I know ZB, who sometimes comes through, Notter is his username, has written npm audit resolver and created a separate schema for audits, specifically audit, like an audit schema. And you know, we've considered what that would look like if we were going to nest that in package JSON. It might bloat it a bit, especially given that there's like a lot of volns or advisors you might want to be ignoring. So yeah, we haven't essentially privileged, or we don't respect any kind of like audit schema today.
Okay, I'll take a look. Awesome, thank you.
No worries. But yeah, I appreciate you putting all the work into this, and excited to collab more. So, did anybody else have any thoughts or want to bring anything up on this? If not, we can head off to the last sort of section that I had here, which was basically things to be ratified. So I'm not sure, John, if you want to give a quick update. I think your work got landed, I think, if that's right, from
Yeah, I think all the PRs are now merged. Just the last one was during the meeting, actually. One quick question: is there anything else we want to look at as far as documentation goes? I mean, I know like with the main PR and the CLI, I added sort of a note on the existing key and cert options that kind of describe, you know, how the cert file and key file scoped ones work. Is there anywhere else that this should be surfaced, or is that good enough?
We could add, go ahead, Joe.
Not off the top of my head that I can think of. Kind of a niche thing, right? Using a cert is off. And it's something people are already doing. We could probably just look to see if there's anywhere in our content, not the command, but like the using npm or configuring npm stuff that mentions certs, and to see if there's stuff to add there. But other than that, no, I think having it in the config is the nicest thing, and we updated the config. And I don't think we want to add those flags to any commands that they show up on their respective pages. Those are a little wordy for those.
Right on, cool. So I'll take a glance and just see if there's anywhere else in the docs where it might make sense. But from my quick look the other day, I didn't see anything obvious. So, all right, thanks.
You can do what we do and have someone else you work with implement this and tell you what goes into it.
Yeah, I'll get Wes to do it because Wes wants this. So yeah, I think he's excited about it.
Yeah, what we can say as well is the Gar's right, like the configuring and using sections of our npm docs are kind of like our tutorials or guidelines sections, which you can be a bit more wordy if you want to like go into like a example usage or use cases. And we have sections in using npm just for higher level topics, like logging, etc. So like if you want to even add a new section there, or new, like when I say new section, it's just a new markdown page that could be specifically on this topic of configuring certs, and certs are considered auth, and so they get respected. They'll respect your registry config and won't pass, you know, like being a little bit more verbose than you might have been in the API docs or the config docs, just with like, yeah, like why you might want to use this. It helps with SEO, obviously, if we have a secondary piece of information there. And yeah, like that would be, I think, the right place to add something else as well. So.
Okay, cool. I'll take a look. Thanks.
Cool. We have about 5 minutes left, and I didn't know if any folks had any other topics they want to bring up or any other items that we didn't get to, other than just the things that need to be ratified, which I know are on my backlog. if there's nothing, I'll give everybody roughly 5 minutes back of their day, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.